we are seeking such collaborations. We have tried to collaborate with a lot of organizations in the past, and we continue to do so. I think this is a very important part of our work, to be able to collaborate and do things together. So I'm happy to say that we are doing this webinar today. We're going to talk about enabling environment for non-profit organizations. Non-profit organizations have become important in the last few years, but they have been very important in the US for a long, long time. And we have tried to emulate that environment on the behest of donors to create a non-profit environment in Pakistan. PCP has been at the forefront of that. So we should be very glad that PCP is going to tell us what these non-profit organizations are, how they are doing, and why they are so contentious today. There seems to have developed a certain tension around these organizations in the country since some of these non-profit organizations got involved in activities that were questionable. So let's talk about that today. I'm very glad that we are having this opportunity to talk about it. What role do these non-profit organizations play in Pakistan? Are they involved in policy making? Are they competitors to local organizations? Are they providing the service that we think they should be providing? What is the cost of their service provision? I, as an economist, always have to look at the cost-benefit ratios. So what is the cost of the non-profit organization service? And what is the benefit? So I think we should talk about that. And the next thing I think it's very important to talk about also is, where is the funding coming from? And if the funding is coming from foreign sources, is that funding coming with strings or is it not? And if that funding comes from foreign sources, what is that funding funding? Is it creating competition with local institutions? If it is, then are the local institutions at a competitive advantage or a competitive disadvantage? So these are some of the questions that come to my mind, and I'd like to ask our speakers to comment on some of these questions. So we've got some great speakers. We've got Ms. Anila Bukhari, Joint Secretary of the NGO Economic and Policy Division, EAD. I think EAD needs a lot to answer for. Does EAD know what's happening in the aid environment? So I'd really like to ask Dr. Bukhari to tell us about that, Ms. Bukhari to tell us about that. Then we've got Muhammad Naeem Khan, Registrar of the SECP. Again, I think I'd like to ask him, it seems it's very easy for foreign NGOs to register themselves in Pakistan, but very difficult for local NGOs to register themselves in Pakistan. Is that competition, fair competition? In my book, that is skewing things in the direction of the foreign NGOs. Then we've got Ms. Shala Amjad, Executive Director of the Philanthropy Center. Welcome, Shadia Bibi. Absolutely. We should like to hear from you on what this field is for competition in the non-profit sector. After, there should be competition there. Then we got Mr. Hamad Naki Khan, Chief Executive Officer of the Worldwide Fund. It should be, I think, a wildlife fund, right? Okay, but maybe I'm mistaken, but he'll tell us. Then we got Ms. Sabah Qureshi, founder, managing trustee of the Pehli Kiran School Education Trust. Okay, so we've got a great field. Let me turn it over to Ms. Anila Bukhari, our first speaker. Anila, please, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you very well.
Okay. So first of all, thank you so much for having me. And there is no second opinion like the civil society organizations and national non-profit organizations, NGOs. They supplement the government efforts for the socio-economic development. But at the same time, their activities have to be regulated for the aid effectiveness. if you look at the past, for decades, there was no mechanism to check the performance of such organizations. So as a government spokesperson, I agree that the space for those NGOs doing the good work has to be created. Yet at the same time, we have to ensure the transparency and accountability as well, because we have to look after the national interests. We have to promote the good work, and we have to stop anti-money laundering, terror financing, religious intolerance, or ethnic violence. So even in past, we have seen like these things have happened in the garb of NGOs or civil society organizations as well. Then I would like to share the NECTA study of September 2019 for the FATF, and some 65,000 NGOs were registered across Pakistan. And when they did the exercise, they came to know like most of them were not working. And that those without any addresses or without any, offices, they inactivated. And according to that, there are, as of today, there are only 16,000 NGOs working across Pakistan. And then I'll talk about the legal frameworks. And even though the policy for organizations receiving foreign funding 2013 was launched in November 25th, 2013, and there was no compliance and enforcement till 2017. So EAD has not received any applications in 2016, and from 13 to 16, there were no applications. In 2017, we received some 20 applications. Then the number increased, and 2018, we received some 51 applications. And then we have received some 200 plus applications in 2019. It was not unless the state bank regulations, they asked for the MOUs to be signed, to be presented for that inflow of the foreign currency coming in to any through any banking channels, that we have started receiving a bulk of applications. So far in the past 3 years, starting from 2017 till 19, EAD has signed only 50 MOUs. And as of today, we in just 2020, the number has been around 300. So 300 MOUs have already been signed. 132 applications have been regretted due to security clearance, and some 400 are still under process. So this is the figures we have as of today. Now, EAD is only dealing with those NGOs which are receiving foreign funding. The rest of the NGOs who are working with on the local funding or doing all the philanthropic work, they are not, they don't have to register with us, because we are only, as per rules of business, concerned with the foreign assistance that is coming in Pakistan, whether it's coming from the NGOs or whether it's coming from any development partner or any donor around the world. Even some of the concept note which was shared with me was saying like, because the space for the NGOs is shrinking, when I review the past performance of EAD, I think this space is expanding. Even during the COVID-19, there was exemption for the 6 months. And even those who have applied with us, we have asked categorically to the state bank not to halt any funding that is coming in the country. So even if they get the acknowledgement, unless the final outcome of their application, they are still eligible to receive the foreign funding. So we are trying to accommodate that as well. Regarding the public-private partnership, that is really commendable. We want to have that with the NGOs and the civil society organizations, and we want to move forward with the spirit of partnership and development. And that is coming from my, at present, our minister, secretary, additional secretary, the whole team is with the same mindset. We want to facilitate the people who are doing good work, and we want to stop the people who are bringing bad name to the country. So most of the civil society organizations which have filed applications with the EAD, they are working, more than 50% are working in health and education, and some of them are working on, so creating that public-private partnership, I think they can help with the legal aid. There are a number of NGOs which have filed applications which are providing guidance to those domestic violence, and they're providing guidance to judiciary. They're working on human rights. They're working on climate change. They're working on religious tolerance and interfaith harmony. So these kind of things have to be, there has to be an outreach for that. That's what I expect. Do people know there are organizations that can provide them with the legal guidance? Do people know that there are organizations which have to which they can approach for any guidance or for any assistance? So this way we can really work together on this national solidarity. Secondly, media can also play a positive role, and it can highlight the work of those NGOs which are providing certain assistance. The two major things that are upcoming with the EAD is the revision of the 2013 policy, because it was formulated in haste, and it is, we know and we confess there are so many deficiencies in it, and we have revised the draft of NGO policy 2021. We have been working on it for last 6 months. This is my 6th webinar where I am communicating with the NGOs and the civil society organizations. And I have held separate sessions in person as well to listen to their concerns, their issues, and we are so mindful of all the things that they are facing as well. We know there is multiplicity of laws and registration authorities. We are well aware of any issues they are facing, and we are now, we have revised actually after all these consultations with our internal stakeholders, our government stakeholders, our civil society organizations, we have revised that draft. And we have linked it with the NGOs portal, which we now are, and now it's in piloting state. We are doing the data population, and we are having some issues there as well. So we are doing trying to make it as user-friendly application so that people can easily download, upload their documents and fill in those forms and submit their application online. So these two things, they are just in offering, and we are hoping to have, maximum of maybe 2 months period in which the NGOs portal will be up and running, and also the new policy will be approved by the ECC. So these are the few things which I wanted to share from my side. And but again, the problems exist on both sides, not only on the government side. So we are trying to improve oversight as well. And we would request, like the NGOs and the government sector, they have to work with sincerity of purpose and sense of responsibility at both sides. So we need to improve the things on both sides. So we are trying to do whatever we can, and we are more than happy to take any questions. And that's all from the EAD side. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Zanila. Thank you very much. But I would like to ask you a question. You said you've consulted everybody. I appreciate that. I'm very thankful for that. But one sector that completely ignored is the university sector. I represent the university sector. The NGOs compete directly with us. For example, British Council is doing the same studies that we do. Asia Foundation is doing the same studies we do. Donors give them funding. I don't call them development partners. They're not development partners, they're donors. They give them funding. They refuse to give us funding. And turning to the SCCP, we try and register an NGO. They say we can't register it. Yet, all international agencies can come and register an NGO. If Harvard wants to register an NGO, they can do it immediately. And if our NGOs want to go to Harvard, they will not be able to register there. Secondly, EAD knows nothing about the consulting firms. Asia Foundation is the consulting firm. British Council is the consulting firm. Chemonix is the consulting firm. Do you have a database on those? Do you have, do you know how much money they get? They get 150, $200 million. Your entire university sector doesn't have 150, $200 million. So are you letting these NGOs compete against the university sector and kill the university sector? Is that the policy goal?
Not at all. Actually, universities can, because they are constitutional bodies. They does not fall within the ambit of our umbrella. So it's not the EAD. We have received several applications from the universities, and we told them, like, you are a statutory body. You have been created under the parliament, and you can access anybody for any funding, and you don't need that registration with the so they are not actually, we are dealing with only the NGOs or the non-profit organizations which are receiving foreign funding. So universities, they can access funding, there is no bar, I think. And there are several universities which are accessing. There is Habib University, which is accessing. I received so many applications, and I informed them, like, you do not fall within the ambit of this EAD policy, because we are only dealing with NGOs. And
my point was
Nadeem Saab, if I may chip in, for the purposes of taxation, universities, private universities in Pakistan cannot operate until they are an NPO. So let me give you an example. LUMS functions under an NPO. Habib University functions under an NPO. So there is a LUMS foundation. And it is through that mechanism that all universities have a not-for-profit cover. And for the purposes of ETC's quality assurance purposes, these NPOs, these universities need to be, these universities need to approach HEC for their quality assurance. Now, PCP, when we look at for taxation purposes, all these universities which are formulated under an NPO, so we do look at them, we do their performance evaluation of the not-for-profit under which they are registered, and simultaneously they are referred to FBR for the taxation purposes. So I think a little bit of more clarity is required in perceiving this fact that NPOs cannot be, universities are not for profit. In fact, they are in Pakistan.
Okay, Madam, I agree with you entirely. But the problem is that universities where the poor people go, LUMS and Habib are for rich people. Universities where the poor people go, which is the big public sector universities, which house 50,000, 60,000 students, they are now, because of the framework, because there's nobody to look after them, they are at a disadvantage. And I think this fact should be recognized by us. So anyways, let's move on to the SCCP. I think our object is to learn, so we should be able to talk about these difficult things, because the public sector universities are at an extreme disadvantage, and I think we should kill them and give them to the NGOs. Simple. Hamad Saab, please tell us, why is it that Pakistani universities or Pakistani organizations can't register an NGO and foreigners can get NGOs at will easily? Give me an idea, please.
Sorry, Nadeem Saab, do you want to revert to SCCP or to me? I'm Hamad from WWF or...
Oh, sorry, it says Naeem Khan next, sorry. I've been given a secret, so I'm following that, sorry. Mohammed Naeem Saab, sorry.
Yes, in fact, thank you for calling me and thank you for inviting me. And I would like to inform you that university is specifically restricted to be incorporated under Companies Act. Therefore, direct university cannot be registered, but university, if university works under some foundation, that foundation can be registered. And
okay.
And Like Habib University Foundation is there.
What about Qaid-e-Azam University?
Sorry?
What about Qaid-e-Azam University or Punjab University?
No, if it's working under some foundation, so then the foundation can be registered, but university, because our law restricts, no? Companies Act restricts कि भाई आप company university as a company registered नहीं हो सकती. That cannot be registered.
So the university under a law is at a disadvantage. That's all I'm trying to clarify.
This is the law of land.
Okay, fair enough. So it's under disadvantage. So go ahead, your floor.
So I would mostly talk about the with regard to the SSP, just give me a minute. I have a small presentation for you guys to just in an overview regarding the incorporation and registration and the laws under which the NPOs are registered. And Nabil Saab, are you there?
जी बताइए क्या हुआ है? What's happened?
मुझे समझ नहीं आ रहा कि वो
भाई मंसूर साहब को गाइड करें प्लीज.
सर आपकी प्रेजेंटेशन अगर ओपन है तो शेयर स्क्रीन के आपके पास जूम पे ऑप्शन आ रही होगी, उस पर क्लिक करें.
अच्छा, ओपन करके फिर.
हाँ पहले ओपन
नहीं थी असल में.
जी.
जी, तो can you see the presentation? Everybody can see the presentation?
नहीं.
No.
No.
सर शेयर स्क्रीन पे क्लिक करें तो छोटी विंडो में आपको प्रेजेंटेशन विजिबल होगी, उस पर डबल क्लिक कर दें.
जी मैंने कर दी शेयर स्क्रीन. जी. नाउ
अब बिल्कुल ठीक है.
जी.
करिए जी.
ठीक है जी. So introduction, what is NPO? Everybody knows a non-profit organization, also known as non-business entity, not-for-profit organization, or not-for-profit institution is a legal entity organized and operated for a collective, public, or social benefit, which cannot distribute its profit among members, in contrast with an entity that operates as a business aiming to generate a profit. This is the basic difference between NPO and everybody knows. कि वो अपना प्रॉफिट डिस्ट्रीब्यूट कर सकती है और ये अपना प्रॉफिट एनजीओ अपना प्रॉफिट अपने ही उसमें ऑब्जेक्ट्स में लगाएगी फर्दर. Then laws regulated by SCCP related to NPC, very few laws like section 42, which covers the licensing, revocation and renewals, and then section 43, post revocation proceedings, and one association with charitable not for profit object regulation 2018, which covers procedure for grant and renewal of license, incorporation of association, conditions applicable on section 42 companies, and fit and proper criteria of directors and etc. Procedure for forced revocation license. Now, what section 42 states? 42 section states that association not for profit formed for promoting commerce, arts, science, religion, health, education, research, sports, environmental protection, social welfare, charity, or any other useful objects. And such company intends to apply the company's profit and other income in promoting its objects and prohibits the payment of dividends to the company's member. So if any company, any proposed entity, if it covers under these circumstances or these law, that can be registered as that can be licensed as a 42 company or as an NPO. Further, NPO is registered as a public limited company, having at least 3 promoters, directors, and all compliances of public company will be applicable on it. The license granted under Section 42 of the Companies Act 2017 may be revoked by the Commission at any time, subject to the fulfillment of the criteria. I mean, there are some grounds on which the license can be revoked by the Commission. However, Commission shall give a notice in writing of its intention to revoke license and shall afford the company on opportunity to be heard. उसके बगैर वो जो है वो कर नहीं सकते. देन जो हमारे जो मेन चीज है वो रेगुलेशंस हैं, जो एसोसिएशन विद चैरिटेबल एंड नॉन प्रॉफिट ऑर्गेनाइजेशन रेगुलेशन 2018, उसके कुछ साइलेंट फीचर्स जो है वो आई विल टेल यू कि उसमें जो है लोगों को क्या चीजें करनी है और क्या वो बताते हैं. These regulations were implemented on 7 June 2018, and by this regulation we introduced various measures to mitigate the risk of money laundering and terrorist financing, and the regulation also required existing association immediately comply with all requirements of the regulation. क्योंकि 2018 से पहले की बहुत सारी regulations थी, तो they are covered in the regulation कि they have to apply immediately all regulation of the 2018. उसमें हमने स्टार्टअप डोनेशन को कंपलसरी किया है, मैंडेटरी कर दिया है. उनके लिए 2 लाख रुपया जो है वो आपके स्टार्टअप जो क्योंकि कंपनी डोनेशन जो है वो बाद में जनरेट करेगी अपना, बट स्टार्टअप के लिए दे नीड सम मनी टू हैव एन ऑफिस एंड सम लाइक अदर थिंग्स. तो उसके लिए स्टार्टअप डोनेशन जो है वो 200,000 पर मेंबर जो है वो मैंडेटरी है. तो ये अगर इफ यू हैव एटलीस्ट 3 मेंबर्स आर रिक्वायर्ड, तो अब 3 मेंबर्स आर 6 लाख रुपए कंपनी के पास इमीडिएटली आ जाता है कि जो उसकी स्टार्टअप के लिए काफी होता है. अच्छा, फिर फिट और प्रॉपर क्राइटेरिया इसमें डाल दिया गया है, प्रोमोटर्स, मेंबर, डायरेक्टर एंड सीईओ ऑल उसका. Then enhance due diligence of such companies and their members, director in respect of money laundering, terrorist financing. अब जब हम उनकी डायरेक्टर्स के अप्रूवल वगैरह देते हैं, तो वी हैव टू चेक ऑल द लिस्ट. CIB, नेक्टा, CIB मंगवानी पड़ती है हमें, नेक्टा की लिस्टें वी हैव टू चेक. प्रोस्क्राइब पर्सन की लिस्ट देखनी पड़ती है, डेजिग्नेटेड इंडिविजुअल सब्जेक्ट टू जो टारगेटेड फाइनेंशियल असिस्टेंस होते हैं, तो उनको हमें देखना पड़ता है कि ये सब कुछ जो है उसमें कोई फॉल्ट तो नहीं कर रहा. तो then maintaining of register of donors, donation, donees and beneficiaries of the fund disbursed. ये भी एक रिक्वायरमेंट है इसी रेगुलेशंस की, containing जिसमें आपकी डिटेल इंफॉर्मेशन होगी अबाउट द सोर्सेज एंड यूजेज ऑफ फंड्स, पर्टिकुलर ऑफ डोनर एंड डोनीज, पर्पस ऑफ डोनेशन. लाइक अब वो डब्बा शब्बा वाला सिस्टम जो है वो खत्म हो गया कि आप बगैर कस्टमर को जाने हुए उनसे डोनेशन ले भी नहीं सकते. एट द टाइम ऑफ रिन्यूअल ऑफ लाइसेंस, क्लैरिफिकेशन फ्रॉम द ऑडिटर, वो ऑडिटर इस बात को कंफर्म करेगा कि फंड्स डोनेशन हैव बीन रिसीव्ड थ्रू प्रॉपर बैंकिंग चैनल्स. Then, as already said, NPOs would utilize its all money, property, donations or income or any part thereof solely for promoting its objectives. Then we have introduced maintenance of a system of sound internal control to ensure safeguarding of the company's charitable assets. Because we all know कि ये लोगों के पैसे हैं, लोगों का फंड है, तो उसके लिए एक साउंड इंटरनल कंट्रोल सिस्टम जरूरी है. देन प्रोवाइडिंग सेपरेट डिस्क्लोजर ऑफ लोकल एंड फॉरेन फंड्स. आपके अकाउंट्स में आपको लोकल और फॉरेन फंड्स का डिस्क्लोजर अलग अलग देना पड़ेगा, जो भी आपको ग्रांट्स मिली है. अच्छा, 5 मिलियन से ऊपर जिस महीने में आपकी ग्रांट या डोनेशन आ जाए, वो यू हैव टू रिपोर्ट द कमीशन. देन स्पेसिफाइंग सिक्योरिटी क्लियरेंस की एक रिक्वायरमेंट है, बड़ी जरूरी है कि फॉरेन फंडिंग और फॉरेन उसकी सूरत में, फॉरेन डायरेक्टर की सूरत में आपको उनका सिक्योरिटी क्लियरेंस रिक्वायर्ड होगा. इसमें मैं आखिर में जाके मिस अदीला से थोड़ी सी बात भी करूंगा कि इस पे जो है वो हम थोड़ा सा फर्दर इसको सिंप्लीफाई करने का सोच रहे हैं. अच्छा, देन वी हैव सम स्टैटिस्टिक्स कि हमारे पास जो है वो पिछले 5 साल में हाउ मेनी NPOs वी हैव रजिस्टर्ड. तो लाइक द फिगर शोज दैट वी आर एट डिक्लाइनिंग स्टेज एंड दिस इज माइट बी द रीजन. जो रूल्स मैंने आपको रेगुलेशन जो बताए हैं, शायद ये उसकी वजह है कि वो चूंकि कंप्लायंसेस बढ़ गई हैं काफी. तो आप देखें 18 तक 84 हम फिर भी सालाना बना रहे थे, बट देन 54 और 47 जो है वो हमने अगले उसमें बनाई हैं. ये टोटल NPO रजिस्टर जो है हमारे पास आज तक जो है 957 हैं, जिसमें से मेजर पार्ट जो है हमारा जो कवर कर रहा है इस्लामाबाद 371, लाहौर 184, फैसलाबाद 10, कोयटा 11, मुल्तान 23, पिशावर 30, कराची 191, and Sakhar 8, and Gilgit 129. Very. The challenges faced by NPOs with regard to the SCCP for their registration and their compliances, I'm just sticking with the SCCP because we don't know external factors. अब now देखिए आप thousands of registered NGOs are working in the country ना, मतलब बहुत सारी, however very minimal are registered with SCCP. उसकी possible reason जो है वो may include strict compliance requirement under SCCP law. The NPO regulation provide complete legal framework for NPOs for compliance which are cumbersome for small scale non-profit entities having limited resources. Then strict monitoring of NPOs by हमें उसकी monitoring भी ज़ाहिर है बहुत सख्त होती है. जब हम इनको सालाना हम उनकी inspection भी बहुत selected उनकी inspection भी करते हैं, और उनके जो है law provide strict monitoring regime which is not easy to meet by NPOs. Strong internal control system, receipt of funding through banking channel system only, monthly funding reports, commission approval for appointment of director. I mean बहुत सारी इस तरह की चीजें हैं जो आम एनजीओ को शायद नहीं करनी पड़ती हैं, तो वो इसलिए जो हमारे पास रजिस्ट्रेशन है वो उसका रेशो बहुत ही कम है. Then issues related to security clearance और फॉरेन फंडिंग. अब फॉरेन फंडिंग के बगैर एनपीओ को चलना, जाहिर है एनजीओ को चलना इतना आसान नहीं होता, बट एनजीओ फॉरेन फंडिंग के लिए उनको सेपरेटली आईडी से भी लेनी पड़ती है, और देन हमें उनकी फॉरेन जो है वो एमओआई से भी लेनी पड़ती है, और जो कि बहुत ही लेंथी प्रोसीजर है. तो ये देन वही उनकी फंडिंग के अलावा उनके अगर फॉरेन कोई डायरेक्टर, चीफ एग्जीक्यूटिव मेंबर्स है तो वी हैव टू टेक क्लियरेंस फ्रॉम एमओआई उसके लिए, तो वो भी एक लेंथी प्रोसीजर है. देन इनहैंस ट्रांसपेरेंसी इन फंड रिसीव्ड एंड यूटिलाइजेशन. द कंपनी शैल रिसीव ऑल फंड, ग्रांट, कंट्रीब्यूशन एंड डोनेशन थ्रू प्रॉपर बैंकिंग चैनल प्रोवाइडेड दैट अमाउंट इक्वल 20,000 से 20,000 तक की आप कैश में ले सकते हैं, बट वो भी जो है इमीडिएटली आपको बैंक में जमा कराने होंगे, और एट द एंड ऑफ द ईयर ऑडिटर ने इसको सर्टिफाई भी करना है कि जो आपके आए हैं वो सारे के सारे बैंक में इमीडिएटली जमा हो गए हैं. देन ये वही मंथली रिपोर्टिंग है. अगर आपको किसी भी महीने में 5 मिलियन से ऊपर रिपोर्टिंग डोनेशन आ जाती है तो यू हैव टू सबमिट एनएफपी फॉर्म 5. एंड देन फिर उसके बाद जो इन सब पे जो सोने पे सुहागा जो आ गया है वो एएमएल और सीएफटी गाइडलाइन जो है फॉर एनपीओज के लिए है. ये इशू की हुई है टू कवर रिस्क फैक्टर एसोसिएटेड विद एनपीओज एंड फंडामेंटल प्रिंसिपल ऑफ गुड प्रैक्टिसेस. तो व्हाट रिस्क आर इन्वॉल्व? एनपीओ फंड रेजिंग इज इन द नेम ऑफ क्या क्या अब्यूज हो सकता है जो एएमएल और या सीआरएफ को कवर करेगा. एनपीओ फंड है, फंड रेजिंग इज इन द नेम ऑफ द एनपीओ एंड यूज फॉर टेररिज्म by fundraiser with or without its knowledge. Funds can be diverted to terrorist outfits while transmission to eligible recipient. Then use of NPO assets. NPO transport facility may be used to transfer people, cash, weapons, etc. Communication network can be exploited by insider, funds manipulated at the point of delivery to support terrorism without the knowledge of sponsor or trustees. Then use of NPO name and status. Partners may exploit NPO name, goodwill for nefarious purpose. Relief may be provided simultaneously to genuine recipient and terrorist elements. अच्छा, within the NPO भी जो है वो उसका misuse हो सकता है. Scheming of donation by these, मतलब जो लोग उसको वो कर रहे हैं, मैनेज कर रहे हैं, वॉलंटियर कर रहे हैं, कॉन्फ्लिक्ट जोन है, तो वो किसी वो दे आर सस्पेक्टेबल टू क्लोज विद टेररिस्ट. अच्छा, फेक एनपीओ भी होती है जो एनपीओ डिलिबरेटली फॉर्म फॉर टेररिस्ट एक्टिविटीज अंडर द गाइस ऑफ चैरिटेबल एक्टिविटीज. तो ये एक उसका रिस्क फैक्टर है. तो देन उसी गाइडलाइन में फिर हमने फंडामेंटल प्रैक्टिसेस जो है वो कुछ बताई हुई हैं कि एडॉप्शन ऑफ बेस्ट प्रैक्टिसेस क्या हो सकती हैं. तो देन एनपीओ मस्ट अंडरटेक एनुअल ट्रेनिंग ऑफ एम्प्लॉइज ऑन एएमएल सीएफटी इश्यूज, एनपीओ रेगुलेशंस, challenges and strategy, highlighting the repercussions of acting against national interests or security breaches. NPO must not establish or maintain links with proscribed individuals or organizations. NPO must not undertake political activities or surveys not related to their mandate. Then good governance में क्या क्या चीजें उनको आती हैं? Identification of every board member. अब ये उनका काम है कि वो आइडेंटिफिकेशन हर बोर्ड मेंबर के करें कि जब उसको बोर्ड में शामिल करें, whether executive or non-executive, and there is screening against the UN CSR list, जो भी लिस्ट मैंने पहले बताई, बहुत सारी चीजें. AML safety policy to be approved by BOD, made public and reviewed annually. Then commitment from top required to develop and enforce the policy. Considering a risk-based approach, NPO may consider to have an independent oversight committee for operational, financial, and risk oversight, including AML risk. Then again, we know your donor, know your beneficiaries, know your partner. Know your donor क्या है? Donor shall not be on the UN list for designated individuals. Complete ID particular होने चाहिए उसके, और उनका NPO को जो है conduct due diligence through public search. आप खुद से भी उनको public search करके information gather करके, अगर उनके donor के credential थोड़े से भी doubtful हैं तो उनको उससे दूर रहना चाहिए. एंड नो योर बेनिफिशरीज, यही चीज उसमें भी आती है क्या, जिसको आप बेनिफिशरी आपके जो हैं, जिनको आप डोनेशन आगे काम कर रहे हैं, जिनको देन उनका भी कंप्लीट पर्टिकुलर्स होने चाहिए. उनके अगर वो कोई एंटिटीज हैं तो उनकी एंटिटीज की जो है वो कॉर्पोरेट प्रोफाइल, ऑर्गेनाइजेशन पूरा उनका आप देखना चाहिए, चेक करना चाहिए. इन केस ऑफ पार्टनरशिप अरेंजमेंट, पार्टनर्स टू सर्टेन बेनिफिशियरी इन्फॉर्मेशन, पार्टनर और ऑर्गेनाइजेशन नॉट बी फ्रॉम एनी सच ऑर्गेनाइजेशन व्हिच लाइसेंस हैज बीन रिवोक्ड बाय SCCP or registration cancelled by the relevant authorities. ये देखना है. Then know your employees. तो ये बड़े जरूरी है कि complete employment record of employees to be maintained by each NPO, whether local or foreign nationals, including permanent address, present address, copy, CNIC, nationality, personal email ID, NTN, phone, mobile, past experience. तो इन सब चीजों को रोकने के लिए जो है वो ये थोड़ी सी हैं. Then ensuring transparency and financial accountability. अपने आप को किस तरह से जो है वो ट्रांसपेरेंसी इंश्योर करें, फाइनेंशियल अकाउंटेबिलिटी. Then STR to be issued if transaction appear unusual, suspicious, irrespective of amount involved, and report to FMU if TF tariff financing activity suspected. Funds to be utilized strictly in accordance with the approved objects as per memorandum of association. Then foreign funds, economic assistance to be utilized on the agreed areas of public welfare, कि जिसके लिए आपने लिया है वहीं पे वो इस्तेमाल हो रहा है. Internal audit mechanism to be established to help identify risk, improve internal control and governance. This is very important. Then solicitation of donations to clearly state the purpose of seeking funds. Record of solicitation to be maintained and provided to the commission on demand. ये रिकॉर्ड आपके पास होना चाहिए और कमीशन कभी भी उसकी डिमांड करे तो वो दे सकें ताकि आप funds to be received through banking channel, dedicated bank accounts for receipt and separate account for the project. Joint signatory of for उनके joint signatory होने चाहिए, और withdrawer जो है और depositor जो है वो भी certain होनी चाहिए, और complete particular of guarantees जो है वो maintain होनी चाहिए. ये कुछ उसके थे. फर्दर जो है जो आगे का है, SCCP is working for simplification of procedure and requirement of regulations. अब I'm also part of it, this committee, जो हम लोग इस पे काम कर रहे हैं कि कितने इसको सिंप्लीफाई हम फर्दर कर सकते हैं, और हमारी कोशिश है कि बहुत जिस हद तक हम कर सकें वी आर जो है ना वर्किंग ऑन इट. However, Pakistan's cultural, geographical and political situation and FATF restrictions allow limited simplification. SCCP is acting proactively and maintaining balance in facilitating versus regulating NPO sector. And we may expect well-groomed, prosperous and transparent NPO sector in coming days. And thank you very much. This is
Thank you, Naeem Saab. Thank you very much. Thank you, Naeem Saab. Shazia Bibi, over to you. Tell us what the issue is here. I'm still searching for the issue. I see far too many regulations in place for domestic NGOs. And I see nothing that's going to stop an INGO from coming here and doing whatever they like. They get 100 million donations from the donors, our development partners, and then they do whatever they like with any accounting. Their studies cost millions of dollars. They give funding to each other, and all they do is compete with the university sector with very bad studies. They're dumbing us down. Shazia Bibi, what do you have to say?
Thank you, Nadeem ul Haq Saab. I think, and thank you for the context that you've laid out once more. when you were introducing, and there were certain questions that you had raised, and which are all very pertinent questions. That what are NPOs? What are they doing? What are the tensions around them? Why and how have they got engaged into some activities which are not lawful? And then what is the cost of doing business? And what are the benefits? And where does the funding come from? So there are, and you've added, I think, a few other questions right here and right now. And there is a lot of questions around NPOs and the space that we talk about, and the shrinking space. So I, on the other hand, feel that instead of talking about the shrinking space, we should be talking about an enabling space and what constitutes an enabling space for NPOs. Now, I would attempt a go at the questions that you've asked, which are all very relevant. First of all, what are NPOs? Now, NPO is a term which is used by the Taxation Department. It is the Income Tax Law 2001, which defines an NPO and uses the term NPO as a not-for-profit organization. And generally, in the market, we hear the term an NGO or a civil society organization or a CSO. Or there are even third-tier organizations which are called the local support organizations. NGO sector or an NPO sector, I think the words are synonymous and they can be used interchangeably. They exist all over the world. These are in the West, in the North. This is the third sector, a much more developed, a much more recognized, a much more celebrated, and a much more emancipated sector, I would say. Yes, they are regulated, but I would say it's not strangulation, but regulation. There's a very fine line which distinguishes the two. Now, in Pakistan, this is not a new phenomenon. We see organizations since the time of Sir Syed. Sir Syed built his Aligarh College by asking for donations, and he would not hesitate to dance, as history tells us, in the streets to collect those donations to build a university where we see a nursery of leaders was cultivated, which then not only led the movement, but were the leaders who were eventually, after Pakistan, leading the country. So, and then his magazine, Tehzeeb al-Akhlaq, and, I can Anjaman Hamayat Islam and Sindh Madrasatul Islam. So the tradition of NPOs in Pakistan is not new. It has grown over the time, it has matured over the time, but the tradition is age-old. What are NGOs doing? That was the second question. Now, these NPOs or NGOs, as you say, they are working in, as at PCP, we see them working in a bandwidth of sector. There is no sector where these NPOs are not doing. My background is from the civil service, and I've worked in the government for a very long time. And then, as you said, not development part. And my now association with the NPOs is now 6 to 7 years long. And I believe that these NPOs or NGOs, many of them have come of age. They have matured, they have institutionalized, they have established systems. They are sound organizations having sound accountability and transparency. These are NGOs which are doing good work across Pakistan, work which perhaps the public sector ought to have delivered, like we see in education and health. And that is where we see the majority of them working. And from water sanitation to animal to human rights to God knows everything. And these organizations have put into place models which are which should be ready to be replicated by the donors in the development sector. I can name health sector organizations which stand out as elements of best practices as models. Look at Aga Khan University, look at Shaukat Khanam, look at Indus Hospital, look at LRBT. And if you look at education, there are the TCFs whose model can be taken to scale. And then there are several other small educational institutions which are reaching to people and which are reaching to those marginalized communities where perhaps the public sector has no outreach, or has never even taken them into their fold. And these organizations are providing quality services, which in the private sector, the elite of Pakistan get those services at a very high cost. So I've personally seen them and seen the good work that they are delivering. Now, then the question was, what are the tensions around them? So I think the tensions around them are nothing unusual for Pakistan. We participate in regional studies, and we look at the regional trends also. We look at the international trends. I think Pakistan was a little late in instituting some framework of regulations. And as you've rightly mentioned, the INGOs in Pakistan, if I was an INGO prior to 2014, I would carry a bag of cash. I would land on an airport and I would open a office and employ people, and nobody would ask you. But gradually, I think the National Action Plan, and I think it was the APS Peshawar incident, and the Osama bin Laden case, the famous, which triggered the thought that what are these? What are they doing? And I think that is where a framework for INGOs and for registering these INGOs came into as response to that, which was absent in Pakistan. However, for local NPOs, the framework had always existed, and it was always there. There are, every month, PCP certifies around 100 plus NPOs which apply to us. And the percentage of those rejected is, I would say, less than 5%. And those which are rejected are organizations which have somehow failed in their procedures and mechanisms and processes, or have not instituted good housekeeping practices. I'm very confident to say that the sector has been maligned by a few which have indulged into activities like all sectors. So it's, again, I would say this is not something which is just very much ingrained in this sector, like all other sectors. So there are, one fish can spoil the whole pond, but it does not mean that the pond and the fish and the others have not performed and have not delivered or are not contributing. You see, charity is something, donation and charity and welfare and khairat and sadaqat and zakat is something which is ingrained in all of us. It's part of our religion. It's part of our life. And I believe this fluid money that is out there, these investments, as I would say, these need to be routed, and choices need to be provided to people, and awareness needs to be built that these need to go to the right organizations. And what are those right organizations? Which are transparent, which have good mechanisms in place, and which are really using the donations and the charity as they should be used. I believe there is, in Pakistan, our study in 2014, which was a decennial study, which looked at individual giving patterns in Pakistan, reported that 240 billion rupees are given individually in Pakistan. And I believe that number is an understated number. The number is much more huge. Imagine the implications if this investment is given to credible organizations. Imagine the potential that is there for meeting your development goals or the SDGs. I don't want to sound too. We all have our reservations on SDGs, but nevertheless, these are goals which bring out and which quantify what needs to happen in the next number of years. And the SARS program, the poverty alleviation program, how is the zakat being collected? How is it being distributed? Who is it going to? Where is the Baitul Mal funding going to? Where are the individuals' donations going to? So there is a lot which needs to be explored, and there is a lot which needs to be researched. And I think there is, there are always questions around NGOs in usage of these funds. And when I was talking about the enabling environment, I'm going to look at what are the factors which constitute an enabling environment. When we see an enabling environment, we see taxation, we see the taxation laws, we see the legal environment, the financial and the fiscal space that is being provided, and the regulatory space provided for these not-for-profit organizations to flourish and to take their work forward. And when I was going back to the question of providing them fiscal space, and you had asked another very pertinent question, the cost of doing business of NPOs. And I had alluded to earlier that people ask these questions कि NGOs को इतना पैसा जाता है जी, ये गाड़ियां ले लेते हैं, ये घर ले लेते हैं. But I tell you, these administrative costs and these operational costs are strictly monitored under the taxation laws, which I think is one of the very important enablers of for not-for-profit to function in Pakistan. And when we are looking at organization, when we are certifying organization, we do enforce these taxation laws which say that 15%, that the administrative cost of any good NPO should not be more than 15%. They should not have a surplus exceeding 25%. And if they do, they are taxed by 10%. So there are means and mechanisms already in place which are looking at the cost of business and measuring them and looking at them, which these NPOs are doing. Benefits, I think NPOs is an integral and an essential and a very fundamental part of this social fabric. These are organizations that are agile. These are organizations, these are grassroots, present at the grassroots level. These are organizations that are connected to the communities. These are organizations that are, really taking with full speed actions which the communities require and where there are the gaps. So I believe this sector particularly needs help and support of the government. Regulation, yes, we are all for it, but how much regulation? That is a very critical question. There's a fine line and a balance, I believe, in letting these good organizations do their good work and take the charity and the donation work forward and bring services to those people in Pakistan, and they are delivering services to those people in Pakistan, which are really not being touched either by the public sector or by the private sector. The legal environment, there are currently 13 laws, and I believe there is some other law that is coming in, and then now we have seen the Charities Commission coming in. The financial regulations, yes, FATF has brought them much more stricter, but I think the government really needs to take a deeper look as to how much financial regulations need to be there, because cross-border financing for these organizations has shrunk. And if it has shrunk, then what support do these organizations need? Should the government come forward and perhaps formulate a fund which can be accessed by these NGOs, which are really doing the good work? And then on the regulatory front, we have heard our two colleagues, both from EAD and SCCP. I think we should look at, and I think there should be a public dialogue. There should be people invited from the sector to see how this all these enablers are further enhanced for people who want to really do good. So I think another very important thing which you had alluded to, and the question that you had asked, was regarding the INGOs and the funding that they are receiving. I think what we have seen is that this mandate really needs to be looked at by the EAD as foreign assistance is brought into the processed and programmed by and through EAD. I think EAD really needs to look at donors giving to donors in Pakistan at very high administrative costs. I think these organizations also need to be looked at in terms of the benefit that they bring, and is it really needed by the communities, or is there another agenda? So I think there are a lot more questions around that, and this is an area which needs a deeper look. But as far as our local partners are concerned, I think they need the support of the government, and they can play a very important role and part in alleviating the poverty alleviation and the eradication agenda, and can be very strong partners for the SR's program. I would reiterate the need for government to really come forward and support these organizations in taking their good work forward. Thank you.
Dr. Nadeem, kindly unmute yourself, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Adila. Shazia Baby. Adila, do you have a question? Do you have some comment or something? You raised your hand.
Yes, I have.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
So I would just comment on the NGOs, because the subject was transferred from the EAD to Ministry of Interior in 2015 through a PM notification. And if you ask the NGOs, they are facing a lot of trouble as well. Because the Ministry of Interior has very strict controls. They have to go through all the security clearances and everything. And there are also multiple stakeholders. So I think if you visit the Ministry of Interior website and see the regretted NGOs, you would be able to see like now there are some controls, and there are almost all the same stakeholders which are working with the NGOs receiving foreign funding as well. Then talking about the SECP, PCP, and EAD, the number registered is still very small, like 1,100 as of today with PCP, 800 applications with EAD, or some 957 with the SECP. That doesn't even make it 3,000 at the max. So those NGOs which are working, they are mostly working with the social welfare departments or the charities commissions and the other Societies Act, and you know, at the district level, they don't need to register with EAD. We are dealing with a very small part of NGOs which are receiving foreign funding. And the Ministry of Interior is dealing with just 100 NGOs, and that's all.
Thank you, Ji. Thank you. Acha Ji, let me turn to Hamad Saab now in the sequence that I was given. But I still have a number of questions which need to be answered. I think we are focusing only on regulation, etc. But one picture that Naeem Saab showed us is very clear. NGO is an Islamabad phenomenon. Once there are majority of NGOs in Islamabad, it clearly lays out the problem that somehow these NGOs are there only for funding and not for work. So I really would like to focus on what the NGOs do. And as I pointed out, for example,
they're very urban-centric. Karachi and Islamabad, very urban-centric, not going into the areas where it's needed.
Exactly. So, I mean, what are they doing? Secondly, as I pointed out, Shazia Baby, I know you are in charge of this, but please tell me, what is this British Council coming to Pakistan to do research where our universities are lying idle? What is this Asia Foundation coming here to do research and getting large funding from donors? This is, EAD should be concerned, Adila Baby, you should be concerned. Why is it that you are not worrying about the fact that our research is all being done by these guys sitting in Islamabad and our universities are sitting there idle? Secondly, for example, if Pri's sitting here with $100 million doing this stuff, then they set up NGOs very readily. They set up NGOs like Raftar, Karandas, etc. I mean, really, I don't understand. So Shazia Baby, you mentioned research. Who's doing your research? I challenged the 2014 report of the Philanthropy Foundation. I think it's a feel-good report. It shows that DEGs, etc., philanthropy, they are not. We really have to get a handle on philanthropy. We are running on a false picture. But nevertheless, this is not my webinar. So I'll just go on to Hamad Saab. Hamad Saab, go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Nadeem. Okay, I also wanted to respond to, because you were stuck to this point where, you know, highlighting Asia Foundation and the British Council and comparing it with local universities. I don't want to go into, you know, that debate.
No,
I think, thank you, Shazia. Shazia made my life easier because, you know, he gave a lot of examples which also kind of try to respond to your queries. But what are NGOs doing? Is the space to operate for NPOs shrinking? I think, let's be honest, this is a global phenomenon. This is not just for Pakistan. It's happening even some of the countries which were kind of so-called liberal, and which had like a lot of freedom for expression and protest, but we have seen that the laws or some of the recent policy frameworks have become stringent, even in those geographies. Now, let's come to Pakistan. And before I, deliberate on the role of NGOs and the work that they are doing, I think, to be honest, there are a few areas where we have lately seen restrictions. I fully agree with Ma'am Leela Bukhari that previously it was free for all, and then suddenly, you introduce a system and people are not ready to embrace upon, and they were not prepared, and even the regulators, I'm sorry to say, they were also not prepared to enforce that system. And that's the reason that we all faced a lot of problems. Organization like WWF, which is in Pakistan, working for the last 50 years, founded by people like Sayyid Babar Ali and Ahmed Bilal Sufi, and all those, loyal, dedicated Pakistanis are on the board. And then they also struggle to get themselves registered or signed an MOU with EAD. I'm so happy we are a PCP certified. We have an MOU with EAD. But the first challenge, yes, the CSO registration and funding. The registration, I think SCCP and Ma'am Bukhari have already shared the mechanism, which has suddenly become very stringent. I think the problem over here in this sector is also duplication. So you get yourself registered with EAD and then there's a Punjab Charities Commission. And then there are parallel mechanisms. And I can tell you honestly, I sent these, like, I think 80 kgs of papers literally to my 25 offices, because there used to be people visiting every day. I'm from this agency, I'm from that department, and we had piles of papers. Okay, this is the progress report. These are the annual reports. These are the accounts. And then you finish that, and then there's a Punjab Charities Commission, and you have to start the process again. So I think you should bear in mind that they are here to do other work also. Funding, I mean, let's be honest again. The funding, the donor priorities, the national fundraising, yes, philanthropy, you see a lot of philanthropy. We are one of the, if you look at the individual givings, one of the top countries in the world. Yeah, it goes to humanitarian, it goes to religious entities. Environment, unfortunately, is not kind of a priority sector. And so the organizations who work on nature conservation, on wildlife, on forest, on environmental issues, they always face challenges. And I have a couple of solutions also, which I would like to share with my colleague from SCCP, at the end. The second is also where, sometimes through the government entities, the freedom of expressions, assembly, through, restrictions on use of social media, free speech regulations. So that's where you also, obviously, the major, I would say, the major victims were human rights organizations, not an organization like WWF. But as part of our work, we also do a lot of lobbying. We also do a lot of advocacy. We also work very closely with the local communities. So what we do, I think, I think NGOs, Shazi also mentioned, they try to also significantly try to bridge the gap where the government entities or the government departments or other stakeholders fail to deliver. And that's where it's not about winning the confidence of the donor community. I mean, I don't want to defend the people in my ranks. I fully agree with you, Nadeem Saab and few other colleagues, when they say in Islamabad, yes, we all know that we are part of the society. There are black sheep. There are drawing room NGOs. If if I have a good relationship with the ambassador, I'm from a senior government servant, I can always ask my wife to open a NGO, and then link her or link my brother-in-law to a foundation, get money, come up with fancy reports, fancy presentations, a very attractive website, and then start raising money. On ground, zero. Yeah, I mean, we are all aware of that, but that doesn't mean that the civil society or the people or the entities who are really delivering, so you have to compare orange with orange. I think that's very important. And that's where the regulation, that's where the transparency, that's where the accountability comes. I think it's important for organization like us, because for us, the credibility, the reputation, the trust with our partners, with our members, with our local communities, I think that's very important. Now, uh, let me try to give you an example. So government departments, environmental protection agencies, wildlife, forest department, they are responsible to do certain job. There is a project which is strictly against, the environment. I mean, huge damage. Everybody gives them NOC. So then who's going to bridge the gap? I can give you example of New Murray project. The previous government started. They wanted to develop a city in Patriata, which is the last healthy forest left in Punjab province. So they got NOC from the Environment Agency, they got NOC from the provincial departments, from federal departments. Everybody was happy because the Prime Minister wanted that. Then NGO like WWF, we highlighted that. We went to the court. Okay, you can't clear all the forests just to, construct more five-star hotels or casinos or resorts for rich people. And that project was shelved. Similarly, in Islamabad Margala Park. So there are so many examples where the NPOs or the civil society organizations, try to bridge the gap. They talk about the rights of the local communities. They talk about they become the voice of voiceless, the wildlife, the habitat. I mean, I'm just giving examples of WWF. Now, the priorities, obviously, and then for foreign funding, Ma'am Adila, you are aware, and obviously Nadeem Saab, like again, giving my own example, if we have a 1 billion, PKR budget, 90% of the money is raised from foreign sources. So we have to compete with like NPOs and civil society organizations from all over the world. So there is not just one, maybe there's one donor who's just interested in Pakistan, but there are donors who are open to literally any application from anywhere in the world. And then they have to trust you. You have to demonstrate, you have to prove, you have to convince them that the issue that you're trying to solve is important, that you have a profile, you have an experience, and you have a history of implementing successful projects. And that's the reason that donors give you money. I mean, yes, there are donors who are, maybe blinded and who are not that bothered and they just want to throw money, or they carry a bag and they're looking for people. But that's not the case. If we are able to raise, suppose, $5 million from European Union to build the capacity of Pakistani textile and leather sector to comply to GS plus status. I mean, we competed with a lot of other international organizations when we submitted that application to Brussels. So I think we need to keep in mind, an organization like mine, we don't take money from the government. We don't want government's money, because then sometimes your hands are tied up. You are bound to do certain activities which you don't want to do. So keep that in mind. This is not taxpayers' money. We struggle hard. We are like the people working at NPO sector. They are loyal Pakistanis. They really want to bring a positive change. They also want to help the local communities. They want the country's environment to be sustainable. They want the private sector to flourish, the exports to increase. I'm saying not all the people, not all the organizations are good. There are all kinds of people. There are all kinds of organizations. That's where the system should be simple, should be not be a very cumbersome, tedious, highly bureaucratic system where you filter. There should be the screening mechanism should be that stringent, that organizations who are delivering, who are transparent, who have who maintain their accounts, who have excellent boards, who who are open to anybody, to visit, to interact with their beneficiaries. Now, the environment, and let's keep in mind, the environment is also becoming stricter by the donors. Now, and I mean, I've been working in this sector for 30 years. Nobody used to ask that if we are giving you the money, if you're working with, suppose 50,000 farmers, we would like to know the names and the CNICs and the mobile numbers of each and every farmer. Now it's not the Pakistan agency. Yes, Pakistan agencies do ask, but now it's the donor community because of FATF and all those regulations. So you have to become more transparent by default because that's what the system requires. That's what your donors require. That's what your regulators now require. And they can call that beneficiary, okay, we are supporting this organization on this sustainable agriculture program, and you're one of the beneficiary farmer. Did you get any training? How was the training? So that's these are the conditions. This is the situation right now. It used to be in the past where nobody used to ask you. They used to give you money and forget. And then, you submit a report after a year, and then maybe you arrange a visit with a fanfare, you give them gifts, haar pana do, ye kar do, tasveerein le lein, good part. I'm sorry, and that's good. That's the good part. That is the situation now. Now, coming to the philanthropy and SSP, taking this opportunity, I have few suggestions. Naeem Saab, we did a study that the CSR, because it's not mandatory in Pakistan. Your guidelines, the 2030 guidelines say it's expected that there should be a board's CSR committee, that the companies, private sector should spend money on CSR. It's mandatory. In India, all the companies have to, registered companies have to, up to, from a certain turnover, have to spend 2% of their net profit on CSR. And they have identified the sectors where that money can be spent. So that's where, at the moment, the situation is that I'm a businessman, I'm making a lot of money, I create another foundation, I give money as part of the CSR to that foundation, I, open a small school or a dispensary in my village, and I said, okay, as part of my CSR, I've done my part. I'm a very responsible corporate citizen. I'm doing this, I'm doing that. So I think that's also important, that the CSR should also be kind of regulated, because that would help. The financial challenges which are being faced by some of the NPOs or the civil society organizations. That would also increase the transparency, and also making the reporting mandatory. At the moment, this annual report and maybe 2 lines on social performance and maybe 2 lines on environmental performance is treated as enough. That should not be the case. We should talk about the sustainability reporting. We should talk about the bottom line. If you earn this much profit, your contribution towards social development, your contribution towards reducing your own footprint. Did you comply to national legislation? Did you, as part of your CSR, what's your, contribution? So I think that's also very important. And lastly, again, I think I'm so happy to learn, Sayyida Adila Bukhari, that the regulators are aware of the duplication. They are aware that the process is tedious, because you complete that process and then you suddenly realize that your MOU is expiring, and then you have to restart, again. And even if you have completed that process, I wanted to open an office in another district. The district administration stopped me. They said, and then I was showing them the MOU with EAD, but they want something from the Punjab Ministry of Interior, because they had received a memo from the Punjab, Interior Secretary, that until and unless you get, the NPO has a kind of a NOC from me, they should not be allowed to operate. So if you are a federal entity, and if we are registered with a federal entity, after going through all this process, I think we should have at least some independence and freedom to operate in this country. I think I'm so happy that there is a realization, and the government is working towards that. Thank you very much, sir.
Wonderful. Thank you. Adila Bibi, you wanted to say something again? Go ahead.
Thank you so much, I would just refer to Mr. Naki's comments. Like one thing he said, like he has to send bundles of papers to several organizations, which I totally agree. And that's why we are working on this NGOs portal. So you can just file your application from anywhere in Pakistan, and soon it will be up and running. So this will solve one of your problems. Be available to all the stakeholders, including the provincial partners. So whether it's the security clearance, whether it's the social welfare departments, and in future, I think we have to go for the digital monitoring, not, going physically at every space, because under this FATF Chapter 5, they are creating e-portals at every level. So if those e-portals can be connected through the application programming interface, I think that is going to identify the risk areas themselves. So these problems we are very much aware, and in future, what we see is there has to be one Foreign Contribution Act, just like the UK Charities Commission, or like where but because of the devolution and the 18th Amendment, it will still be complicated. So the mandate is like, okay, this is an organization dealing with the foreign contribution. This is the registering for the Companies Act, and this is so. But in future, we see, and our minister is aware, like there has to be simplification. There has to be, one governing law, and there shouldn't be like at the district, at the provincial, and then at the federal level, there are multiplicity of laws. So we have even identified, like at present, we have some 18 plus registration authorities across Pakistan. So hopefully in future, the things will be better. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Sajida, I have a question for you.
एक मिनट जी, can we just go through we got the last speaker, फिर उसके बाद आ जाएंगे बिल्कुल. Okay जी, very quickly. I think first thing I might say, we are questioning the loyalty of nobody. Everybody is loyal. Everybody is loyal, but everybody operates in a certain framework. The famous story of Jean Lafitte, who was a pirate, but when it came to fighting the British, he was loyal to the government. Even the mafia was loyal to the government. So everybody is loyal, but it's the framework we are talking about. So nobody's questioning any loyalty. Second thing is, there's a lot of talk about gap identified. I don't see the gap identified. I don't see why 365 NGOs, or God knows, multiplicity of NGOs are sitting in Islamabad filling the gap of the governors, which doesn't exist in Islamabad, it exists outside. So I think that also is a self-defeating argument. Secondly, this thing about why setting up NGOs, etc. Yes, I agree. There's a lot of cronyism in NGOs. So I think Sabra Qureshi will tell us about cronyism in NGO. Thirdly, I would like to point out civil society is not an NGO. I mean, there's a presumption here that civil society is equal to the sum of NGOs. No, I don't agree. I think universities are a part of civil society too. So what we are doing now, donors are doing, maybe deliberately, maybe without thinking, they're marginalizing the university and empowering. Abhi bataya Hamad Sahab ne, they've got $1 billion budget. Should I tell you how much the budget of PIDE is? 150 million rupees. So you can imagine how disadvantaged you are compared to you. And the donors don't fund us at all. So and this is the story of all universities. So let's talk about that too. And I see how the donors waste money. $5 million have been given to studies that are totally useless, that don't go anywhere. And I can give you a list of those studies: $10 million, $20 million, and we don't know where the money comes from. Of course, I know where the money comes from, but EAD doesn't. Comes from different, goes to World Bank, goes to UNDP, goes to this, goes to that. There's a whole Ferris wheel of studies going on that are absolutely ridiculous, that nobody knows about. All they do is they take out human capital from here and take them to the NGOs. Okay. The third thing is evaluation. I've never seen an evaluation of an NGO. All the evaluations are self-serving. The fourth thing is, where is the membership of the NGOs? I never see the membership. So before they pretend to be civil society, they should show us their membership. Sabra, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Nadeem. You've raised a lot of very provocative questions, and
there's no point in having a boring webinar.
And I'm hoping that we're going to get enough time at the end of all the presentations to have a very healthy Q&A. I can see there's a lot of people who have dialed into this webinar, so it's only appropriate that they get a chance to ask questions also. Going last in such a Such an event is always disadvantageous because a lot of what I was planning to say has already been said. I will try not to repeat and make my presentation as brief as possible in order to allow more time for Q&A. Just the fact that this particular topic has been under discussion for decades signifies a certain ambivalence on the government's part, if I may say so. It takes me for a walk down memory lane. I was involved in several civil society forums and platforms, national and provincial, in the early 1990s, discussing this very same question. To start off with, there's been a lot of talk about the work NPOs do. Let us all agree that NPOs provide a valuable function across the developing world, especially for a country like Pakistan, which has severe gaps in basic services coverage and overall low socioeconomic indicators. We still at an HDI ranking of 154 out of 189 in the UN's 2020 Human Development Report. Government needs to understand and value this role in order to ensure the efficacy of NPO work and its successful outcomes. It's the country benefits. Which brings me to the next question. Are NPOs seen as partners, competitors, or more worryingly as adversaries? This conversation is meaningful only if NPOs are seen as essential partners in the country's development, working for the same goals, albeit with different approaches. If we compare this with the for-profit sector, you'll agree that investors are always welcomed and valued. NPOs need to be seen in the same light and equally valued. I'm happy to see that Shazia has laid out a lot of the positives of the work NPOs do. So if NPOs are valuable partners, then it goes without saying that their work should be facilitated and the space enhanced. We would like to encourage the government to adopt a higher standard of partnership and facilitation because of the value this sector brings. Which brings us to today's discussion: what hurdles can be removed and what proactive measures taken so that NPOs can be fully effective in what they do. Before we dig deeper into that, let us also recognize the elephant in the room: security concerns and external agendas. A lot of people have talked a lot about that. We are cognizant that there may be some rotten apples within the NPO mix with suspicious agendas that do cause security concerns for our country, but they need to be viewed as exceptions and outliers. These entities should be screened, separated, and dealt with differently. Government should not paint all NPOs with the same brush, nor apply onerous processes and bureaucratic hurdles on the entire nonprofit sector because of a few NPOs. We also need to recognize that the nonprofit sector is not homogeneous. It is as rich in diversity as the country itself, from the nature of work NPOs do to their size, outreach, location, funding, etc. For example, we can't lump together entities like Shaukat Khanum Hospital and the Pehli Kiran schools, or Aurat Foundation and ED Foundation. They're very issues, they're very diverse, their issues are vastly different. Advocacy-oriented NPOs with a rights-based focus, citizens' rights, human rights, women's and children's empowerment, labor rights, have traditionally been viewed with suspicion by the government because of the accountability the NPOs demand from legislators, policy makers, decision makers. In some cases, government entities may even resent NPOs for showing them up in an inefficient light. So, and then there's NPOs focusing on humanitarian and disaster relief work, which are another category. They need to be handled in the context. All of these NGOs need to be handled in the context of their unique circumstances and situations, according to their different categories. Coming to the first question posed, is the space shrinking for NPOs? In my opinion, the answer is a resolute yes. To understand this dynamic, let us briefly unpack each of the broad areas defined for this discussion. I'll try and avoid, as I said, repetition. Many of these issues have been identified in the PCP report on enabling environment for nonprofit organizations, and many of the speakers have already talked about them at length. On legal and regulatory framework, I'd just like to briefly say that there is a lack of a clear, unified regulatory structure for NPOs. There is no one-stop shop that addresses all compliance requirements for NPOs, which is a useful tool to reduce processing burdens. as in the case of a private entity wanting to start a business. Go to one place and you have all of your needs laid out. NPOs frequently struggle with clarity on what rules apply to which legal structure. Then there's a lot being talked about the multiple layers of registration, starting from EAD itself, who's cognizant of this fact. Everyone's talked about the multiple layers. In some provinces, NPOs have to register with many, many different departments and agencies, which needs to be streamlined. Changes in laws, which are often quite frequent, are not communicated to NPOs clearly or immediately, so they remain unaware and hence not in compliance. Standardization is missing. Lack of availability of standard templates that would simplify administrative processes and make them much more efficient. Lack of specialized capacity within government agencies of trained staff working on non-profit compliance processes. Government officials are neither sensitive to nor understand the non-profit sector, their context, or their issues, which leads to further delays. I'm saying all of this not in a vacuum. As a non-profit, that's been in operation for 25 years, we have faced these issues repeatedly. NPOs themselves have limited capacity to fulfill all compliance issues and implement best practices. With no guidance and limited resources, they stumble through these cumbersome procedures. And as has been mentioned, a wide spectrum of NPO sizes and capacities calls for a differentiated and intelligent and risk-based approach. The detailed compliance requirements could be relevant for a large player, but it may place enormous and unrealistic burdens on medium and smaller players. So all of the above hurdles that I've mentioned take up a lot of NPO staff time, effort, and resources, taking away from their ability to focus on their core work and achieve desired results. In the area of compliance and financial regulations, we've already heard about the EAD registration, which has added yet another layer and a time-consuming one. But I would like to make an earnest plea here. Please do not treat NPOs at par with commercial and corporate entities. Philanthropic organizations need to be seen and treated differently. For example, imposition of the same amount of withholding tax on NPOs significantly increases their cost of operations, and Shazia has talked about this. I can quote numerous examples from our own JAQ Education Trust experience, where vendors, especially smaller ones, simply refuse to bear the withholding tax amount and transfer it to the NPO. If the main purpose here is documentation and ensuring a paper trail of financial records, then even a nominal amount, 0.1 or 0.2% withholding tax, can be imposed on NPOs instead of the high rates currently enforced on all commercial transactions. Please keep in mind that nonprofits are mostly operating on donations, many of which stem from a charitable zakat perspective. Each rupee or whatever currency donated to the NPO needs to be stretched to its maximum level in order to achieve desired results. Similarly, government can support NPOs through provision of social security, EOBI, and other such benefits, thereby relieving NPOs of a significant financial burden. This is where the partnership concept is essential if the common goals and value of the NPO work is recognized. There also needs to be clear recognition and understanding of FPR rules and regulations. For example, tax exemption procedures. We have been struggling for 10 months to renew our tax exemption status. It's been a nightmare. I won't get into details, but happy to answer questions later. Understanding a rule, another issue here is that we need to understand the rules. For example, overhead limits for overhead expenses. I struggle to explain this, that for service delivery organizations like ours, which operates schools, teacher salaries are a program cost, not an administrative overhead cost. Even simple things like this, one struggles with all of these issues with the government people one deals with, FPR or other agencies. Dealing with banks and their understanding and implementation of banking rules is another challenge that we face constantly. On fundraising, on the revenue side, There's a lot that can be done, and we can encourage or incentivize giving by individual and corporate donors by providing better tax breaks for contributions to bona fide nonprofits. Tax credits available to the local donor are low as compared to those in other countries. If donors are given higher tax credits, they would be encouraged to give more donations. There's a lack of fundraising platforms at local levels, particularly for smaller sized NPOs who lack fundraising outreach and capacity. Funding sources are generally decreasing. International agencies, anecdotal evidence suggests that there is a reduction in flows from international institutions, which are stretched thin globally. There's a lot the government can do, both in terms of contributing to the work, as well as by grants. For example, why does the government not leverage philanthropic giving by offering matching funding grants, which is done in so many parts of the world? Where the government is inviting NPOs to assist with service delivery, for example, in running schools and health units, several provinces are doing that, there needs to be an equitable and realistic cost sharing, not a very skewed balance here, as we've seen in a lot of the education foundation school partnership programs, where the government's cost is something, but what they give to the NGO is 1/3 of what the government's own cost is. Corporate sector, I feel this is something that we need to talk about, but it should be made mandatory for all listed companies to get engaged in CSR activities. This is happening in countries like India, France, Denmark, China, South Africa, etc. Individual philanthropy in country, as the PCP reports show, remain focused on welfare-oriented, charitable, non-institutionalized giving. Need to highlight impact of NPO work in order to encourage more of organizational giving. Overseas, again, more easily accessed by the larger NPO entities. We need a credible platform to enable structured philanthropy from the Pakistani diaspora. On the cost side, cost of doing business is increasing for NPOs. Again, Shazia mentioned that. We need cost reduction measures, especially for smaller and middle-sized NPOs. Government needs to strengthen monitoring mechanisms instead of imposing increasing licensing and onerous documentation. On public perceptions, public image, and it goes without saying, NPOs need public trust and goodwill. Government's current posture conveys a lack of trust of the nonprofit sector. This erodes public confidence in such entities and their giving. The overbearing security focus needs to shift to a much more facilitating role after appropriate screening and checks. There is a widespread perception of NPOs following a Western or foreign agenda. This is something one can have a detailed discussion on. We don't have the time for that, but happy to delve deeper into this later. Rights-focused NPOs, particularly those working on women's empowerment, face harsh criticism for a misperceived Western cultural agenda. This needs correction. I'd like to end with a few recommendations. The establishment and existence of PCP is a very positive development from an NPO perspective. But given the scale of challenges discussed today, they need to play a much larger, more proactive role. For example, PCP can be the one-stop shop for all NPO needs. PCP can play the key role envisaged for it, being the bridge, the linkage builder, mediator, facilitator, and more importantly, the role of building trust between NPOs and the government through open, honest communication. PCP can also help with capacity building on both sides, develop NPO capacity for better compliance. And we had one of the speakers talk at length about the good practices, listed a detailed list of good practices. NPOs need their capacity built to become better, to improve those best practices. And government capacity needs to be built to streamline procedures for efficient approvals. And of course, sensitization. PCP's own teams also need to be sensitized, as do government teams, to these processes. All legal, regulatory, financial compliance measures affecting NPOs should be undertaken in consultation with them instead of being imposed arbitrarily. This helps and contributes to much greater trust building. PCP can create an active stakeholder consultation group and obtain inputs from them on all government proposed measures prior to imposing them. Fundraising is again one of the most important areas in which PCP can play a role. Perhaps along the lines of the Foundation Center in the US, which is an umbrella organization consolidating all information about giving channels. They also conduct workshops on a range of topics. PCP can also play an important role in highlighting a positive image of NPOs, especially to potential donors, but to the public at large. Showcase success stories, impact of the work of NPOs, lives changed, even sensitize policymakers. Government can and should provide resources for advertising, whether on print and electronic media, or of course now through internet, online channels, as Ms. Adila has talked about. Most importantly, send out positive messages about NPO work. I think we need more updated quantitative analysis for nuanced understanding of NPO challenges, especially related to funding flows and utilization. We've got PIDE here as a partner in this webinar. That's the work they do. That's their bread and butter. They can talk much more to this issue. Need greater use of technology and online mechanisms to facilitate all the dimensions we've discussed today. Happy to hear again from Ms. Adila that they are working along those lines to reduce the burden on NPOs, simplifying compliance, encouraging fundraising, promoting a public image. Government NPO partnerships should play to the strengths of both. Government has the infrastructure and outreach, NPOs have the community trust building ability. To summarize, we believe nonprofits have a significant role to play in Pakistan's development. Government needs to view them as important partners, build trust, and take them into confidence while developing future regulatory and compliance requirements. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Lots of people have been waiting, so let's go directly to the floor. Zia Bande sir. Zia Bande. Anybody else wants to speak? Raise your hands now. Don't raise them when I'm closing the session, please. Go ahead, Ji.
अच्छा जी सबसे पहले जी बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया आपका. I can't raise my hand, sir.
Okay,
if you allow me to speak.
Noted. Zia, go ahead.
Okay. थैंक यू वेरी मच जी. सबसे पहले तो एक बात मैंने ये करनी थी, जब आप एनजीओ सेक्टर की बात कर रहे हैं और आप बात कर रहे हैं गरीबों के लिए, आप बात करें उन तबकात के लिए जो महरूम है, तो मुझे तो ये सारी कहानी जो है वो इलीटिस्ट नजर आ रही. मैं अभी इसकी गाइडलाइन पढ़ रहा था जो आपकी है इसकी एससीसीपी के ऊपर, वो भी सारी अंग्रेजी के अंदर है. क्योंकि मैं इस पैराए में बात कर रहा हूँ कि मैं थोड़ा काम हम करना चाह रहे हैं स्ट्रीट वेंडर्स के ऊपर. अब हम उनके लिए कोई ऑर्गेनाइजेशन या एसोसिएशन कर रहे हैं. अब उनको समझाना या करना या उनको इंगेज करना एक ग्रास रूट लेवल पे उनको मोबिलाइज करना, उसके लिए बहुत ज़्यादा आपको हैंड होल्डिंग करनी पड़ेगी उन लोगों की, क्योंकि उस तरह का हमें सपोर्ट स्ट्रक्चर नज़र नहीं आ रहा. जो शराइत लगाई गई हैं उसके अंदर आई डोंट थिंक वो स्ट्रीट वेंडर्स कर सकते हैं. तो मुझे एससीसीपी से भी ये मतलब है गाइडलाइन चाहिए है कि अगर हम इनको मोबिलाइज करते हैं, एक तो आपकी कंपनी 42 है जो कि उसके अंदर आप रजिस्टर कर सकते हैं इनको. दूसरा है सोसाइटीज एक्ट. तो अगर हमने ग्रास रूट लेवल पे गरीबों को मोटिवेट करना है, ये नहीं कि अमीर गरीबों के लिए जाके काम करें, वो उनके लिए फंड रेजिंग करें, गरीब खुद अपनी काम करें, खुद अपनी ऑर्गेनाइजेशन चलाएं. तो उसमें आप हमें किस तरह गाइड कर सकते हैं कि हम फिर आगे जाके उन लोगों को गाइड करें भाई कि ये सिर्फ और सिर्फ अंग्रेजी बोलने वाले लोगों का काम नहीं है, ये जो इस मुल्क की अक्सरियत है अवाम की, वो कैसे मतलब है कि एनजीओ बना सकते हैं, वो कैसे अपने हकूक के लिए आवाज उठा सकते हैं. उसके लिए हमें जरूरत है कि आप हम लोगों को गाइड करें ताकि हम आगे जाके उनसे बात करें. शुक्रिया.
आमिर दुरानी साहब. And there are no other hands, so please don't come in late. If you want to raise your hand, raise it now. Amir Durrani sir.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much. So I think the fundamental part of this conversation, which I think you described very well, is that are civil society organizations only not for profit? I think इसके ऊपर बहुत बहस की ज़रूरत है. दूसरी बात जो आ जाती है, and I'm going to raise 3 or 4 points just for the panel to answer. दूसरी बात यह है कि when we talk about, who are the gatekeepers of development vis-a-vis, और this goes to Hamad, कि बात ये होती है कि gatekeepers, क्या हम international rules, उन्होंने example दी पत्रियाटा की, मैं उन्होंने counter example देता हूँ खुंजराब national park की, जहाँ पे कि basically local जो हमारे विलेज ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस हैं, दे आर टेकिंग केयर ऑफ अ नेशनल पार्क एंड लाइफ इज गोइंग ऑन फाइन. यानी फॉर एग्जांपल एक मार्खोर हंट होता है, 80% इज कंट्रीब्यूटेड टू द लोकल्स. ठीक है, तो लोकल ऑर्गेनाइजेशन स्ट्रेंथन हो रही हैं. तीसरी बात आ जाती है, ये आई थिंक द पर्सन बिफोर आई थिंक हमाद ने की थी, कि कंपटीशन, वो कहते हैं कि वी विन ग्रांट्स फ्रॉम इंटरनेशनल, लाइक ईयू की ग्रांट आती है और उसके अंदर हम बाकी INGO से compete करते हैं. लेट मी गिव यू एन आइडिया कि लोकल NPOs या NGOs उसमें compete नहीं कर सकती हैं. अच्छा, एंड पे जो आप दो चीज़ें मैं आपको कहना चाह रहा हूँ जिसके मुझे जवाब चाहिए, वो ये है कि सबसे पहली बात ये है कि वाई आर वी डूइंग दिस. देखिए, सबसे पहली बात ये है कि इस्फत और हमाद accepted this in the prelude to what he presented. He said कि yes, not-for-profits are a dying breed. Now, not-for-profits are actually a dying breed. Today, social impact organizations are actually, if you look at dollar per capita, the social impact organizations are raising far more money than actually the not-for-profits. So I think this debate that civil society organizations have to be not-for-profit has to be declared passé. Because simply baat, and the reason that is important is because grants do not beget sustainability. यानी ये पिछले 30 साल से मैं देख रहा हूँ, and I think Sabra knows this very well, Shazia knows this very well, that actually इस वक्त अगर मैं पाकिस्तान में हूँ, I have registered myself as a social impact organization, and there is no such thing in SECP. There is no such thing in the 5 different registrations, जिसकी 2 जिया बांडे ने हाईलाइट किया. एक आप सोसाइटीज एक्ट में कर सकते हैं, आप सेक्शन 42 कंपनी बन सकते हैं, और उसके अलावा भी 3 है. तो इशू ये है कि क्या जरूरी है कि हम नॉट फॉर प्रॉफिट हों टू डू गुड. ठीक है. दूसरी बात, जो आखिरी बात मैं करना चाहता हूं, कि इंटरनल सिक्योरिटी एजेंडास की बात कि हमें ना पूछा जाए, ये ना किया जाए. Actually, just recently, in the last 2 weeks, we have begun to realize through the Gilgit-Baltistan lens that actually a lot has been happening in Pakistan. I think Adila will agree with me on this, that, these organizations, which NACTA and NAP have actually started to identify, that national security has become an issue. Because चाहे आप वो ले लें अपना कोई भी NGO उठा के इनको ले लें, they are going through a lot of trials and travails because they are actually fundamentally trying to change the narrative in Pakistan, which maybe Pakistan does not want to change. So I think ये एक चीज है. आखिरी चीज, for WWF and for people who are doing NGOs, देखिए, सिंपल सी बात है, मैं अगर यहाँ पे जिस तरह ज़िया ने कहा, मैं एक स्ट्रीट वेंडर्स की एक NGO बनाना चाहता हूँ. एक बच्चा या बच्ची जो लम से निकलता है, who are able to understand and they are passionate and emotive about bringing change in the society, they are unable to do this because I offer them 30,000 rupees a month as interns. You guys offer them ₹1 lakh as joining fee. So this just really is unpalatable. Coming back and summarizing, I think the debate should be, what are civil society? Do I support civil society organizations? The answer is yes. Without civil society voice, there is no, and Nadeem Saab, you remember this from Asimaglu's, the debate we had in that webinar, that actually for a shackled Leviathan to happen and for us to graduate from a paper Leviathan to a shackled Leviathan, we need to have civil society. However, that does not mean not for profit. And I make a final corollary on that education, like the stuff that Sabra Baji is running, sorry, it's Sabra Qureshi is running, is actually has to be looked at differently from all this? Thank you.
Thank you very much. If there are no other questions, I'll turn back to the panel, but very quickly, I'll just ask my own couple of things. One is, I think there's a great effort on your part to distinguish yourself from the rest of Pakistan, which is, I think, shows also a disconnect between the NGOs and the rest of society. I mean, you are talking about over-regulation for you and too many documents. We have studied in Pakistan, for example, the telephone sector. If they have to lay out an internet line, they have to take 51 permissions. If you sell a piece of land, you have to take 10 permissions. If you have anything that you have to do, there's a huge amount of documentation. The business sector is drowning in this. There was talk of withholding sector, withholding taxes. There are 70 withholding agencies in the country, including schools, including banks, including this. Withholding, we have estimated, costs something 2 to 3% of revenues for people to run the withholding outfit. So yes, everybody is drowning in regulation. It's not the NGOs only. So I also feel that because the NGOs have donor clout, they are getting special consideration, that they're getting a donor portal, they're getting this, they're getting that. But what about the rest of us? We are also drowning in regulation. Huge amount of regulation in the country. We call this permission NOC economy. This is a permission NOC economy. So yes, you suffer from it too, we suffer from it too. So let's not try and make NGOs separate from the rest of society, because that shows you're disconnected from the rest of society. Second, and that creates a lack of trust, because we've checked it out. There's a huge amount of regulation everywhere. So it's not just NGOs, it's everybody. Okay. Now, the second thing that I still come back to, what are the NGOs doing sitting in Islamabad? I mean, should there be so many NGOs in Islamabad? And everybody that I meet is a development practitioner in an NGO. I mean, does that sound like civil society being made a development practitioner in an NGO? Right? They don't come and work for universities. They don't teach in universities. They're all development practitioners. Is that what is your socioeconomic objective? Are you meeting your socioeconomic objectives with that? So I'll leave it at that. There are too many questions. I've raised them already. And I think the debate has to go from beyond regulation and security to actually looking at what's happening with the NGOs. What are they doing? Are they fulfilling a purpose? As I said, I've given you names. What are these international NGOs doing in Pakistan? Right? They get huge funding. They get billions of dollars. And we get no output from them. I mean, I can name again, Chemonics, for example, ASI. ASI is working on a NWFP seed project. $20 million. God knows what they're doing. We'll hear only after it's gone that it's gone, finished, over. Same thing with this thing. Oxford Policy Management is working in with the Ministry of Finance for the last 20 years. Every year they get a few $1 million. Is this what we want? Because I would argue we should have had the Competition Commission here. We, the university sector, I want to act as a representative of them. We are being dumped upon. NGOs are dumping on us and killing us. So let's make up our minds. Socioeconomic sector will happen through the NGOs, and the universities should be closed. Over to you. Anybody wants to take the lead? Last words from the panel. Adila, do you want to go first?
Yes. Okay. I would just answer a few of the queries, like Ms. Sabira has raised the question of time-consuming processes. So that's what we are exactly trying to do with the NGOs portal, to reduce the time to maximum 60 days. And even we have talked to the stakeholders. If we are not receiving any concurrence or any approvals within that given time frame, then it will be assumed to be they don't have any objection. So we are working on having the do's and don'ts in which the prohibitions and obligations are clearly defined. And secondly, yes, we want to create space for the people who are doing good work, who are credible, but at the same time, we want them to be accountable and come through the transparent process. So the transparency has to be ensured as well, and not the controlling and the monitoring approach in a way like, for example, we are living in another era where everything has become virtual. So we believe that digital monitoring will resolve lots of problems on the both sides, whether it's on the government side or it's on the NGOs or civil society's side. And I think those who are doing good work, they shouldn't be afraid of any regulations actually. And they'll clear through everything. And with upcoming policy, revised policy, and with this NGOs portal, I just see like a lot of good things are coming up as well. So there has to be checks and balances, but there has to be,
Great.
facilitation as well.
Great. Hamad sir, go ahead.
Okay, quickly, I think I agree with the few statements made by a colleague Amir Durrani, but I think the couple of them they were not correct. So I think it's important to set the record straight. So he said that who the community is managing the Khunjarab National Park. My simple question is, who mobilized the community? It was the NGOs. Who gave the money? it was a donor.
Fund, local NGO.
This was a MSCP project funded by the Mountain Area Conservation Fund. The community was mobilized. Now the local community who introduced trophy hunting. Yes, 80% goes to the community. It's a success story. But please, look at the history of that activity. I fully agree with you that it's not necessary that civil society should be non-profit. I am a strong advocate of that statement, and I'm trying to do that even within my own ranks. I fully agree with you that social impact is more important. I think the donors now, most donors, they don't want to give you grant, and that's the reason that, I can give you my own example, that now we focus on bankable projects. The projects where private sector also chips in, private sector makes an impact for social impact, and then, if they require seed money, or the donors who are willing, or there are financial institutes who are willing to provide that money on a short-term basis, but that's not a grant. It's like it has to, the project has to create a social impact. Competition, I think nobody has stopped the local, we are also a national NGO. We are not a NGO, by the way. So nobody has stopped that. Yes, it's just like, the case that graduates from LUMS get better jobs than graduates of a maybe Haripur University. That's a dilemma. The thing is, we all need to take collective action to do that. That's the reason. And by the way, again, you gave the wrong example. We do not give interns 100,000 rupees. You give 30,000, we give zero. Interns have to, we don't pay interns any money. So, and that's the reason that we struggle to find good interns, by the way. But the people who, who trust our work, they join and they don't get any money, by the way. So I think that's very important. That sometimes there's a misconception, there's a hearsay, and then we, unfortunately, we come up with such sweeping statements. Nadeem Saab, you're absolutely right. The competition is not just for NGOs, competition is for businesses. Two wrongs do not make right. I think that's the objective of such forums, that to raise collective voice, that if there are problems, if there are hurdles, which as Ma'am Adila mentioned, they also realize, they also acknowledge that, and they are working towards that. So that's the good part. Same is the case. The government wants, ease of business, having, they don't want that 50 NOCs are required. And we know that 50 NOCs, 49 require an envelope, and you get an NOC. So I think we are also part of the society. We have to look at the situation around us, and then lastly, I sometimes feel dejected when educated people, they talk about, they speak the same language which some of the other strata of the society say about NGOs. Foreign agenda, vested interest, making money. Again, I'm saying, not all the organizations are absolutely, working in a proper way. There are rotten eggs, there are black sheep in our ranks. That's where the system should be so, accurate, transparent, that such organizations are literally thrown out. I'm so much in favor of that, because one rotten egg, I think so many people gave the example, one rotten fish can spoil the entire pool. I think that should be the objective. Thank you very much.
Fair enough, but still we have NGOs largely in Islamabad and a huge number of development practitioners. I don't know where they came from, and I think that has to be evaluated too.
You need to revisit your list of people.
Sabra Bibi, bataiye. What are these NGOs doing in Islamabad, and what are these hundreds of development practitioners? Where are they? What are they doing?
सर आप साबरा
That's a
बीबी
fact.
ना कहे, साबरा आपको क्लास ले लेगी.
Oh, Sabra, sorry. Sabra, Jobi, Sabra, what should I call you? Okay, go ahead, Sabra. Go ahead. Before Amir Durrani makes it an issue. Go ahead.
Thank you, Hamad Saab. Reiterate many of the comments that he has said. And I think, Nadeem, just the thrust of this discussion actually reinforces the stereotypes, images, the stereotype images about NGOs. ये है, इस तरह है, पैसे millions आ रहे हैं, बाद में बैठे हैं, urban based हैं. I mean, this just absolutely proves the point that public image, that stereotypical image of NGOs needs to be corrected. And one way that someone like PIDE and other universities can actually help this is do a detailed survey, collect updated data to see कितने NGOs को कितने millions and billions मिल रहे हैं और किस तरीके से वो काम कर रहे हैं, so that this laid to rest these stereotypes and the misperceptions about NGOs. Let us use hardcore data to guide us, not anecdotes.
Exactly.
The request to all of the partners here, and again PIDE and PCP, the two hosts of this event, can take the lead in starting a lot more rigorous, in-depth research to collect data on all of this. I'd like to just briefly touch upon Amir Durrani's comment about CSOs versus non-profits. CSOs, yes, is an all-encompassing term for many different. I mean, इस किसी ज़माने में कोई उसको non-governmental organizations कहते हैं, non-profit organizations कहते हैं, civil society organizations कहते हैं. There's like, it needs a much more detailed, nuanced discussion. Yes, Amir, social entrepreneurship is now sort of the new buzzword. These when a lot of organizations are going towards social entrepreneurship, which brings together the whole concept of good impact, social impact, but not necessarily in a non-profit path. So that again is something that we can discuss later. In interests of time, we cannot get into too much detail about that. But I will say that civil society sector in general, as a whole, encompassing all of these various types, is a vibrant part of any society. If I know I may be, I may receive some kind of a feedback on this, but a country like Bangladesh, which was struggling, it was a vibrant civil society sector that helped lift its floundering socioeconomic indicators and led it to where it is today. So that let us not throw away the baby with the bathwater. Civil society sector, which includes nonprofits and all kinds of non-governmental organizations, is a thriving, vibrant part of any society. Let us support it. And we're talking about the entire country being submerged by documentation and all such requirements. Let's try and improve it. Bring in more efficiencies into our system. Not say that because everything is happening that way, we just need to accept it. We want to push the government to improve those efficiencies. And I'm happy to hear from Ms. Adila that they're already working along those lines.
Okay. Naeem Saab, go ahead.
I'll have a last comment.
Of course, I'll come back to all of you. Don't worry. Absolutely. Naeem Saab nahi hai?
I'm very much here. But I would thank to all and had a very good discussion. Or most of the points have gave us alerted, and I think we should move. मतलब बहुत सारी चीजों में हमने ये देखा कि बहुत सारी नई चीजें पता लगी हैं यहाँ से. तो we will also discuss at our level, and we'll inshallah try to facilitate maximum that. Thank you.
Adila, maybe you want to say something? Go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much again. I'll just say कि हमारे पास जो data है उसमें like 200 plus NGOs are working in education. So I say I would think they should think of what the PIDE has talked about, the university education and the public sector education, and they should have some collaborations there as well, because 200 plus NGOs which have filed their applications with EAD are working in this sector, and like 23% are working somewhere. That makes 31% working in education. So they can have such collaborations with the public sector, schools and public sector, universities to lift that and do that combined research studies and things like that. And बाकी जो हमारा concern वाला area होता है, that's the rights and the religion वाला, तो उसमें भी I think इतना ज़्यादा नहीं है, एक वो strict measures नहीं है, like 6% is working on the religion and some 15% are working on the rights. So that's not a total less than 20%, but most of them are working in education and health. और एक ये कि NGOs वो हैं जो कि tax exempt होती हैं, or they don't have to, go through all those, even though they have regulations, but जो for-profit organizations हैं, उनके लिए like they have to go through, I think, much more laws, because they have to abide by all the lands and they have to pay all the taxes and everything. So they are totally different scenario for profit wala. Even though I know I totally agree के NGOs for profit भी काम कर रही हैं और non profit भी काम कर रही हैं. तो बस ये दो comments थे. But I think those 200 NGOs have to think about working in education now.
Agreed. Ji Shazia, maybe last word to you. Go ahead.
Ji, thank you, Nadeem Saab. Just a few answers to the queries raised. एक तो हमारे पास जो data है उसमें हमें education में 35% और health में 37% NGOs काम करती नजर आ रही हैं. And secondly, जो आप बात करते हैं इस्लामाबाद में NGOs की, हमारे पास जो applicant NGOs हैं उनकी सबसे बड़ी तादाद जो है वो लाहौर और कराची से है. So urban centers जो हैं, ये बात आपकी दुरुस्त है कि वो NGOs वहाँ ज्यादा हैं, but there are many in small districts and other areas also. And finally, I think philanthropy is the mainstream. It's the heart on which the society thrives. हमारी तो Islamic values हैं और हमारी giving उसके अंदर बिल्कुल entrenched है. I think उस philanthropy को harness करने के लिए strategic philanthropy के बारे में सोचना चाहिए. I think government should look at ways to harness this particular resource that is available, flexible resource that is available, and how this can be utilized. And secondly, I think there needs to be regulation is fine. I mean, there are now two things about it, but I think there should also be attempts by the government to support the NGOs and financially and by showcasing the good work that they do, so that the people, they do see that Pakistanis have their heart at the right places और वो contribute करते हैं charity के through भी और welfare के through भी, और सिर्फ सही इदारे को अगर दिया जाए तो I think the potential for exponentially seeing the impact of philanthropic investments would substantially improve the lives of people who really need it.
Thank you.
Shazia, my data analysis was actually based on only those NGOs which have filed their applications to EAD.
सर नदीम साहब, इसमें एक बहुत बड़ा तजाद है. देखिए जो अदीला ने आपको स्टैटिस्टिक्स दिए हैं, what the thing, the problem in this is, if I may just challenge Adila on this, देखिए हमारे पास 4 किस्म की नॉट फॉर प्रॉफिट रजिस्टर्ड हैं. देखिए हमारी डिस्ट्रिक्ट बेस्ड NGOs हैं, मतलब फॉर एग्जांपल थरदीप हो गई जो अब आगे निकलने की कोशिश कर रही है, ठीक है. हमारे पास तरक्की ट्रस्ट है जो बलूचिस्तान वाइड काम करती है. हमारे पास RSPs हैं, ये सारे हैं, ठीक है. कुछ लोग आपके जिम्मे में आते हैं, कुछ उस जिम्मे से बाहर आते हैं. आई एम सॉरी फॉर द इंग्लिश स्पीकर्स, लेकिन आई हैव टू, मेरी अर्ज सुन लें. आपने जो कहा ना कि ये एजुकेशन में काम करते हैं, इसमें काम करते हैं, देखिए मेरी अर्ज ये है कि अगर हम फॉर एग्जांपल इस डिस्कशन में, जिस तरह कल हम सामिया लियाकत को लेके आए थे तो एक दिन पहले, तो हमें चाहिए कि इस डिस्कशन में हम पाकिस्तान पॉवर्टी एलिवेशन फंड को लेके आए, चाहे वो अच्छा इदारा हो या बुरा इदारा हो, लेकिन उनके पास 140 पार्टनर्स हैं. आपके पास वो 140 पार्टनर्स में से सिर्फ 58% रजिस्टर्ड है, ठीक है. उसकी वजह सिंपली ये है कि जिन पे आप नजर रखना चाहते हैं उसमें से कुछ डिस्ट्रिक्ट हैं, कुछ लोकल NGOs हैं, कुछ VOs हैं, विलेज ऑर्गेनाइजेशन. आपको ये मैं बताऊं कि फॉर एग्जांपल हुंजा की LSO है, हुंजा कैडो काराकोरम एरिया डेवलपमेंट ऑर्गेनाइजेशन, जो कि पूरे हुंजा डिस्ट्रिक्ट की 18 जो उनकी यूसी बेस्ड एनजीओ है उनकी एक क्या कहते हैं कि एक मजमुआ है। तो हमारे पास अभी डेटा नहीं है। सो आई वुड लाइक टू सेकंड यू साबरा एंड ऑल्सो हमाद कि देखिए यहाँ पे हमें जरूरत है कि प्लीज पाइड को पैसे दीजिए, ताकि पाइड एक पूरा एक स्फीयर यानी आपको एक स्टडी दे जिसमें कि ये क्या कर रहे हैं ये लोग, ठीक है, उसमें आपको असल डेटा मिलेगा। दूसरी बात कि जो सीएसआर की किस साहिबान ने बात की, वो सीएसआर जो है इट्स पासे नाउ। आजकल फॉर एग्जांपल इवन एंग्रो डज नॉट डू सीएसआर एनीमोर। मैं अभी नेप्रा के साथ काम कर रहा हूं, तौसीफ साहब के साथ, उनके सीएसआर फॉर आईपीपीज में बड़ा असू ये आ रहा है कि दे आर नॉट इवन पार्ट ऑफ ऑल दिस। तो इशू ये है कि हमें वीओज को, जो विलेज ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस लोकल लेवल पे बैठी हुई हैं, जिनको पीपीएफ की वजह से, और ये नदीम साहब इस पे मुझे मारेंगे क्योंकि ये पीपीएफ के इतने हामी नहीं है, लेकिन पीपीएफ की होने की वजह से, होलसेलर के होने की वजह से उन्होंने ये काम कर दिया है कि इन द लास्ट 20 years they have been able to graduate civil society organizations into section 42 companies or otherwise. तो ये प्लीज कंसिडर कर लीजिएगा। थैंक यू।
Thank you, Ji. Anybody else?
I was just talking about 815 NGOs that have filed applications with EAD and receiving foreign funding. So I'm unaware of the total landscape of NGOs.
Okay, Ji. Done. Okay, Ji, folks. No more questions. Let's close. Thank you very much. It's been wonderful. मैं बस एक छोटी सी बात कहना चाहता हूँ कि जी, I find webinars only important if you ask tough questions. So forgive me if I ask tough questions. I deliberately do that because it's important to learn. We can't ignore things and have a clubby atmosphere. There's too many of these conferences and done by NGOs and donors in the Serena are clubby affairs where everybody agrees with everybody and they have a kawali clapping each other, which is very nice, but I don't do that. So forgive me if I did that. The second thing that I'd like to raise is, यहाँ कोई एनजीओ से बंदे हैं, यहाँ कोई डेवलपमेंट पार्टनर्स हैं, यहाँ कोई डेवलपमेंट वो प्रोफेशनल्स हैं यहाँ? ये सवाल मैं हर वेबिनार पे पूछता हूँ। हमने कोई 300 वेबिनार्स कराए पिछले साल में। कोई डेवलपमेंट पार्टनर, कोई एनजीओ नहीं आता। With the result, they're not interested in engaging with us, with the university sector of Pakistan. They are superior to us. They don't want to engage with us. ठीक है, तो ये भी बात नोटिस करनी चाहिए कि ये सिविल सोसाइटी ये है जो एक दूसरे के साथ इंगेज नहीं करती, या सिविल सोसाइटी वो होती है जो एक दूसरे के साथ इंगेज करती है। मैंने जितना सिविल सोसाइटी पे पढ़ा है, चाहे बिल्डिंग द थर्ड सेक्टर हो, चाहे वो क्या कहते हैं आइडिया ब्रोकर्स हो, चाहे टिटॉकविल हो, सिविल सोसाइटी एक दूसरे के साथ इंगेज करती है। ये जो सिविल सोसाइटी अपने अपने एनजीओ में बैठी हुई है, सिविल सोसाइटी नहीं बनती, बिकॉज द सम ऑफ द पार्ट्स हैज टू बी ग्रेटर देन द होल, बट इफ द पार्ट्स डोंट सम अप, इट कैन नेवर बी द होल। Right? So I think there is something that we need to think about here too. I think ये ना हो कि हम सेल्फ सर्विंग उस डायलॉग में बैठ जाएं, जो मैंने बहुत सारे ड्राइंग रूम में देखा है, और मैं काफी चैलेंज करता हूँ और काफी जलील होकर बाहर निकलता हूँ, मुझे मारते भी हैं लोग कि भाई तुम क्या कह रहे हो। मैंने कहा यार ये एनजीओ आपका है, ये मेरा नहीं है। वो अजीजुद्दीन साहब थे हमारे फेमस मार्क्सिस्ट, जब मैं बच्चा था तो उन्होंने एक दफा लिखा था कि यार ये क्या है, ये आपके ड्राइंग रूम का एनजीओ है तो और बात है, ठीक है ना जी। द क्वेश्चन इज, are we becoming a civil society? We can't become civil society by saying, give me my lolly, give me my candy. I don't want to engage with you. I just want my own little whatever. Okay? And donors, lastly, we got freedom in 1947. My famous cartoon, which I should have brought out, but I didn't bring out. 1950 में कार्टून निकला था पाकिस्तान टाइम में, लियाकत अली खान साहब चल रहे हैं डॉलर की बैसाखियों पे, और उसके पीछे डोनर्स खड़े हैं और कह रहे हैं हमने इनको पकड़ लिया, ये कहीं नहीं जाएंगे, इनको हम ऐसे ही मफलूज रखेंगे। तो मैं सोचता हूं कि डायरी ऑफ अ न्यू इकोनॉमिक हिटमैन नीड्स टू बी रिटन। द पॉइंट इज नॉट टू कीप अस इंडेटेड नाउ, द पॉइंट इज टू सील आवर माइंड, एंड वेयर द गवर्नमेंट हैज टू थिंक अबाउट इट, इट्स नॉट सिक्योरिटी, इज योर माइंड। फिफ्थ जनरेशन वॉरफेयर में सिक्योरिटी का एलिमेंट ये, डू यू हैव अ माइंड और नॉट? एंड इफ यू आर गोइंग टू डिसएम्पावर योर यूनिवर्सिटीज and give it to the NGO sector and development partners and development practitioners, then I'm sorry, you've given away your country. I have that view, and we can talk about that view anytime you like. ये आ गया जी, नहीं अगला वाला दिखाएं जी, ये तो एक है, अगला वाला दिखाएं, वो है ये 1950 में निकला था, और ये सिचुएशन आज और खराब हो गई है। अब तो बैसाखियों से व्हील चेयर पे आ गया प्राइम मिनिस्टर, अब तो सिर्फ एनजीओस कंट्रोल करते हैं सब कुछ, यानी कि डेवलपमेंट पार्टनर्स। तो इसको हम कब देखेंगे, कब करेक्ट करेंगे, डायलॉग क्या होगा? तो हमें ये कहना एनजीओस के लिए रेगुलेशन लेसन करें, प्लीज करें, पर हमारे लिए भी तो करें। हम भी तो पाकिस्तानी शहरी हैं, यहाँ कोई बिजनेस नहीं लगा सकता, यहाँ कोई जमीन नहीं बेच सकता, यहाँ कोई जमीन नहीं खरीद सकता, यहाँ कोई कारोबार नहीं कर सकता। तो ये हमने बड़े वेबिनार्स इस पे किए हैं, आपको बड़ा इस पे चैप्टर एंड वर्स हम कोट कर सकते हैं, but I'll leave it there. Thank you very much. Wonderful discussion. My special thanks to PCP. PCP, please engage with us. We are happy to do whatever you say, and we are happy to do it free. We don't need money. ठीक है, कोई बात नहीं, गुजारा हो जाता है हमारा, ठीक है। हम तनख्वाह नहीं दे सकते।
Thank you, Nadeem sir. We really appreciate your offer. We'll be in touch.
Thank you जी, खुदा
Thank you.
All the best.
Thank you. Allah
Okay,
Hafiz.
thank you very much.